Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophets Joshua chapter 22 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
You know, if I asked you how a simple pile of stones almost triggered a bloody civil war in ancient Israel, you'd probably think I was pitching a modern political thriller. But actually, that's the exact historical reality we're diving into today. This chapter features a massive, almost catastrophic misunderstanding. We're talking about a situation that brings the newly settled tribes of Israel right to the absolute brink of a devastating civil war. Bloodshed is literally on the horizon, and it's all because of a single physical structure and, honestly, a whole lot of assumptions. We are going to walk through this fascinating story verse by verse, uncovering exactly what happened, what the people were thinking, and how an absolute disaster was narrowly, miraculously avoided.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our step-by-step roadmap for today. First, context and the journey home. Second, the altar crisis begins. Third, confrontation and true intentions. Fourth, a peaceful resolution. Fifth, key ideas and lessons. And finally, a quick chapter recap. So part 1, context and the journey home, covering verses 1 through 9. To really grasp the immense stakes of this chapter, we have to start with the context. The major wars of conquest in the land of Canaan, they've largely concluded. The land has been divided up among the tribes, and now it's finally time for some incredibly weary soldiers, guys who have been fighting far away from their families for years, to finally go home. In the opening 4 verses, Joshua summons a very specific group of soldiers, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And Joshua just offers them this immense, heartfelt praise. He tells them, "You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded." He's acknowledging that for a long time, literally years of brutal, exhausting warfare, right up to that very day, they hadn't deserted their brothers. They carried out their mission perfectly. And now that God has given the rest of the tribes peace and rest, Joshua gives them official, honorable permission to pack up their tents and head home. Now, just to be absolutely clear about who these groups are, we refer to them as the Eastern tribes. And why is that? Well, earlier in the biblical narrative, back under the leadership of Moses, these specific tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, asked for and received their permanent land inheritance on the eastern side of the Jordan River. It's a region known as Gilead. But they had made a solemn vow to Moses. They promised that their fighting men would cross the Jordan River and lead the charge to help the rest of the Israelite tribes conquer the western side, the land of Canaan, before they settled down to build their own lives. And they kept that promise through years of conquest. Now, separated from the rest of Israel by the natural boundary of the Jordan River, it's time for them to head back east to their wives and kids who have been waiting for them all this time.
Looking at verses 5 through 9, we actually see their departure. But before they leave, Joshua gives them a strict, almost fatherly warning. He knows they're moving far away from the central sanctuary, right? So he tells them in verse 5 to be extremely careful to do the commandment and the law. And he breaks this down into really specific actions. To love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to cleave or hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Basically, distance from the religious center of Israel shouldn't mean distance from God. Joshua then blesses them and sends them on their way. They depart from Shiloh, which is in Canaan, heading for Gilead, and they are definitely not going back empty-handed. Joshua explicitly tells them to return with their great wealth. We're talking livestock, silver, gold, bronze, iron, and a vast amount of clothing, the rightful plunder from their enemies. And it commands them to share this wealth with their brothers who had to stay behind to guard the home front.
Part 2, the altar crisis begins, covering verses 10 through 12. Okay, so everything seemed perfectly fine, right? A joyous return home with wealth, victory, and blessings from their leader. What could go wrong? Well, in verse 10, a physical structure instantly shatters the peace. As these eastern tribes reach the border, specifically a place called Gilead near the Jordan River, they stop. Instead of just crossing the river and finally going home to their families, the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh build an altar. And the text specifically notes that it was an imposing altar, a large, highly visible, massive stone structure right there by the Jordan. And let me tell you, word of this massive construction project immediately travels back across the land to the rest of the Israelites. Notice the location here, Gilead. The text explicitly says it is in the land of Canaan, meaning it's on the Israelite or western side of the Jordan. To the rest of the tribes, this is an absolute, blaring red flag. According to the strict laws given by Moses back in the book of Deuteronomy, there was to be only one central place of worship, one legitimate altar for offering sacrifices to God. At this specific time, that single authorized altar was located at the tabernacle in Shiloh. So building another altar? It looked exactly like a direct, aggressive rebellion against God's law. To the Western tribes, it looked for all the world as though the Eastern tribes were setting up a rival religion, or even worse, falling into the local Canaanite idol worship before they even made it back to their own territory. So the crucial point is found right here in verse 12. The reaction of the Western tribes is immediate, it is visceral, and it is extreme. When the Israelites hear about this altar, the entire assembly gathers at Shiloh. But they aren't gathering to have a polite theological debate. They are gathering to go to war against them. They are fully prepared to launch a devastating military strike against the very brothers they just spent years fighting alongside. The stakes could not possibly be higher here. A massive, bloody civil war is entirely imminent. Moving to Part 3, Confrontation and True Intentions, covering verses 13 through 29. The Western tribes are armed and ready to fight, but thankfully they decide to try diplomacy and send a delegation before launching an all-out attack. In verses 13 to 15, we get the details of this incredibly high-stakes envoy. The Israelites send a highly prominent figure, Phinehas the priest, over to the land of Gilead to confront Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. But he doesn't go alone. With him are 10 chief men, one head of a family division from each of the Western tribes. So this is a heavy-hitting, top-tier diplomatic envoy. They cross the Jordan, arrive in Gilead, and confront the Eastern tribes directly. As you can imagine, it is an incredibly tense standoff. We really need to pause for a second to understand exactly who is leading this group. Phinehas is the son of Eleazar the priest, which makes him the grandson of Aaron the high priest. If you know your biblical history from the book of Numbers, you know Phinehas is famous for his absolute, uncompromising, and zealous dedication to God's pure worship. He previously took dramatic, lethal action to stop a plague caused by Israelite idolatry at a place called Peor. This is not a man who tolerates idol worship or rebellion. The fact that a priest, and specifically this fiercely zealous priest, is leading a potential war party shows exactly how the Western tribes view this altar. They view it as a severe religious crime that requires an immediate, holy purging. Verses 16 through 20 outline the delegation's harsh, almost heartbroken accusation. Phinehas and the 10 chiefs, they do not mince words. They speak for the whole assembly of the Lord, demanding, "What is this treachery that you've committed against the God of Israel?" They accuse them, saying, "How could you turn away from the Lord this day and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him?" You can really feel the emotional betrayal here. The Western tribes just spent years bleeding and fighting alongside these men. To see them immediately turn and seemingly abandon the covenant they literally just promised Joshua they would keep, it feels like a massive personal knife in the back. To back up their fears, the delegation points straight to history. They cite two specific, highly traumatic events. First, the sin of Peor, an event where Israelites engaged in idolatry and immorality, which resulted in a deadly plague falling on the entire community. Then they mention the sin of Achan. Earlier in the book of Joshua, a man named Achan secretly stole devoted, forbidden items from the conquered city of Jericho. And because of the sin of this one man, God's wrath came upon the whole community of Israel, causing them to lose a battle and suffer casualties. The delegation is terrified. They believe that collective punishment is imminent. They argue that if the Eastern tribes rebel today, God will be angry with the whole community of Israel tomorrow. They are so desperate to avoid this fate that they actually offer to share their own land on the Western side if the Eastern side feels defiled, just as long as they don't rebel by building a rogue altar. Now we reach verses 21 through 25, and we hear the passionate, almost panicked defense of the Eastern tribes. They reply to the heads of the clans by swearing by God's name not just once, but twice for sheer emphasis. The mighty one God the Lord, the mighty one God the Lord, he knows, and let Israel know. They state absolutely that if they built this altar in rebellion or to offer unauthorized sacrifices, they deserve to be destroyed that very day. But then they reveal their true motivation in verse 24. They cry out, "No, we did it for fear." Fear of what? Fear that in the future the descendants of the Western tribes would look at the Jordan River as a permanent dividing line and say to the descendants of the Eastern tribes, "What do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you. You have no share in the Lord." Continuing in verses 26 through 29, the Eastern tribes explain exactly what the altar actually is. Listen to this. They didn't build it for burnt offerings. They didn't build it for grain offerings or any sacrifices at all. They built it simply to be a visual witness. They made it as an exact replica of the Lord's actual altar at the tabernacle in Shiloh. Emphasize that word replica. Their logic was that if future generations ever tried to excommunicate them, the Eastern descendants could point to this imposing replica and say, "Look at the replica our fathers built. It proves we have a shared faith and a shared share in the God of Israel." The tragic irony here is just profound. The very monument they built to prevent future division was the exact thing that almost caused their immediate destruction. They are fiercely, desperately denying any intent to turn away from God.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict of the entire chapter. On one side, we have the perceived intent. The Western tribes looked at the physical structure, applied their own assumptions, and saw a rebellious altar meant for unauthorized idolatrous worship. But on the other side, we have the actual intent. The Eastern tribes built a peaceful replica. It was never intended to be used for a single sacrifice. It was meant only to serve as an architectural witness of their unyielding shared faith. It was a massive failure of communication, not a failure of faith.
Part 4. A Peaceful, Unified Resolution, covering verses 30 through 34. Now that the air has finally cleared and the truth is out in the open, let's see how this is resolved. When Phinehas the priest and the 10 leaders hear this explanation, the text tells us they are immensely pleased. Phinehas, the zealot who is completely ready for war, instantly becomes a peacemaker. He declares, "Today we know that the Lord is with us, because you have not acted unfaithfully towards the Lord in this matter." By clearly explaining their true intentions, the Eastern tribes effectively rescued the Israelites from bringing God's judgment upon themselves through a bloody civil war. The delegation returns to Canaan, reports the good news, and the Israelites praise God, completely dropping the idea of going to war. Finally, in verse 34, the Reubenites and Gadites officially name the altar, "a witness between us that the Lord is God."
Part 5. Key Ideas and Lessons.
Before we finish up, let's look at some of the really practical lessons we can draw regarding human nature and community just from the plain meaning of this text. First, communicate directly before jumping to conclusions. The Western tribes were ready to slaughter their brothers, but sending a delegation to actually talk and ask questions, that saved thousands of lives. Second, this highlights the profound danger of making assumptions based purely on appearances. The altar looked exactly like rebellion, but its purpose was the literal opposite. Third, we see the deep importance of preserving shared unity and faith. The Eastern tribes went to great lengths, hauling huge stones and building a massive monument just to ensure their children wouldn't be cut off from the community in the future. And finally, zeal must be balanced with seeking the truth. Phinehas was zealous, right? He was ready to fight for God's honor, but his zeal didn't blind him to the truth when the Eastern tribes provided a righteous explanation. He listened, he understood, and peace prevailed.
Part 6. Chapter Recap.
To quickly recap the narrative arc we just walked through step by step, the Eastern tribes are honorably discharged by Joshua and head home to Gilead after years of faithful service. On the way, they build an imposing altar near the Jordan River. Seeing this, the Western tribes assume it's a rebellion against God and gather for full-scale civil war. However, a delegation is sent, and the Eastern tribes clarify their true intentions. The altar is just a replica, a witness for future generations to prove their shared faith. The explanation is accepted, and peace and unity are completely restored across the Jordan. It's a powerful reminder that taking the time to just ask why can literally change the course of history. So ask yourself, what altars of rebellion might you be misjudging in your own life simply because you haven't paused to have a conversation? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.